Welcome back to the I Play Team podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, actress Dedee Pfeiffer joins the show. She has been in several movies, including playing the role of Allison in the cult classic Vamp. And on television, Dedee co-starred in the sitcoms Sybil and For Your Love, along with many guest appearances, including shows such as Seinfeld, Friends, Burn Notice with Oda Trace, and Simon and Simon. More recently, Dedee appeared in the ABC drama Big Sky alongside Catherine Winnick and Reba McEntire. Currently, she hosts a solution-based podcast called Down with Dedee, which helps others who are still struggling with any form of addiction to lighten the day for a more positive outlook. Her sister, Michelle Pfieffer, is a Hollywood icon who has been nominated for 3 Academy Awards. Dedee, welcome to the show.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
And thank you for being here. My first question is, how did the acting bug bite you?
Oh, God. Well, I'm 59 is how I like to describe it. For those of us in our 50s, I like to have fun with that. So I'm 59, about to turn 60 on the new year, and I started when I was 18. So if you do the math, it's been a few centuries or decades, actually. I was 18 years old, and at that point, I'd had multiple jobs because back then you could work as a kid doing anything, really. If you could do it, you got the job. I just was working a ton of jobs. My sister at that point was on Scarface, and I drove to LA, and I was like, hey, I think I want to be an actor. And she said, oh, really? Okay. Get into an acting workshop and don't even think about anything else. Don't think about it, headshots or an agent or anything. Go into a workshop and see if it's something you really want. I was in that workshop for 2 years because I was horrible, shy, couldn't remember my lines. I would stutter, actually kind of still that way. But eventually I was able to learn the craft a little. And I'm going to really say I probably learned it more as I went along. And then I finally was able to go out and audition. And when I wasn't stuttering or going up on my lines, I got a role. And that's how it kind of started. I stumbled into it. And I always thought, like all my other jobs, once I learn it really well and get bored with it, I'll move on. Problem with acting is I don't think you ever really learn it because it's a craft that you do need to fine tune constantly because it's very competitive. And once you think you have all the answers, you're done. So years later, I'm still trying to figure it out.
It's kind of true in a lot of fields, right? Where the more you think you know, the more you don't.
Yeah. Because think about it. If you're like the best of something, someone else is going to come and learn everything that you know. So you better keep on it, keep crisp, keep alert and curious. As long as you constantly remain curious in life, you'll never stop learning. Everything changes every minute of every day. So why we would think we wouldn't continue changing is kind of silly, right? So if life is constantly changing, which it is, then I think one also has an opportunity to continuously change. Makes life really interesting that way too. At least for me.
When you were in the acting workshop, which of the teachers really helped you kind of overcome a little bit of the issues that you were having?
My first acting workshop was Peggy Fury and her husband, Bill Traylor, and it was method, hardcore method. So back then it was a lot different than it is now. Now it's almost like a natural style of acting. Very little technique, I'm going to say, is probably being used. And then there are those of us who are seriously trained in Stanislavski. Let's see, there's quite a few I studied with different philosophies of acting. Sandy Meisner, I mean, it goes on. And we were trained, and you would use any one of those set skills depending on the role you played. At least that's how I used to use all my different ways of being taught how to act. I find that now helpful, but not always. The days of the good old-fashioned character actor are not as marketable as they used to be. If you notice it, if you go back, I mean, we were character actors. You played a role, and now people, they kind of want you to be more natural. So that in itself has changed. I often sometimes find when I'm using my set skills, I'm told, throw that out the door and just make it real. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I spent all those thousands of dollars on acting class when they're telling me to throw it all out and just be real. So for me, at least back then, it was getting over my nervous jitters so I could focus on the set skill that they were trying to teach me, which was internal work, moment before. I was very jittery, so I had one acting coach literally have me sit on my hands and do an entire scene sitting on my hands because I was always using my hands. Now they really love my hands in my acting, but back then they felt it was distracting. So one of the many things was they were trying to get rid of my quirks, like I said, which is interesting because now it's my quirks is what they want. So times change, man. You got to stay up on it.
It's interesting being a character actor, how typecasting used to work almost for the benefit of actors and actresses. And now, as you mentioned, it doesn't.
They want less actors and they want you to be more like the role. And that's interesting to me because it's like, if I'm going to play a heroin addict, I would hope to God you really don't want somebody who is active in that disease. So that means you're going to have to go to a character actor or somebody who really has the chops. So someone who's a natural actor may not be able to perform that because that's when you research and you study and you watch idiosyncrasies and the behaviors of someone who's truly in their disease to play, say, a heroin addict. So for me, the more life experience you have, I think it certainly enriches your toolbox of things that you can pull from. But now I think it's more of a natural acting. And then you get those meaty roles is what we'll call it, where you really do have to pull out your acting chops. They're still out there. They're hard to get because everybody wants the meaty role where you can really show that you can act.
In terms of the quote unquote meaty role, what's the favorite meaty role that you had?
Oh, God, I've been so fortunate. I've had quite a few. Okay. It's a small independent film. Well, I'm not saying this because I produced it, but I produced it. But it was a small one-act play that an amazing writer named Margot Kessler wrote that I used to perform on stage for her. And it's called The Tub. And we brought it up on its feet and we made it into a short film and we filmed it. And it did do the independent film circuit. And it did really well, actually. It really did. And I'm going to say that role of Frannie because she was very complicated. And characters like that, you can overplay very easily. And I think what was so beautiful about what she wrote with that complicated character were the undertones. So I'm going to say Frannie in The Tub, just because she was so complicated. And I would say portraying a person that can be misunderstood. And those are always really interesting and challenging to play. And I think you have to be responsible to a character that you don't do it wrong.
Taking a step back, you grew up with Michelle and a couple of other siblings. What was it like growing up in the Pfeiffer household?
Just like every other house, I have my older brother, Rick, my older sister, Shell, and then my little sister, Lori. And my brother, Rick, and Michelle were born in the 50s. And then about 5 years later, Lori and I were born in the 60s. So it was kind of two generations. And well, being raised in the 50s and 60s, let me tell you, it's a whole different than it is now. It's a whole different playing field. Also, my father sadly had the disease of alcoholism, and my mother had some issues with mental health issues with shock treatments in the 50s. And then I was born, which I always say, well, that explains that. So there's a lot of us raising each other. Not that my parents didn't raise us. They did the best they could, considering, right? But there was a lot more expectations on children back then than there are now. You had to get up and do it. When your parents told you to do it, you did it. Even if you didn't know how, you figured it out. So we're very tight because we're children of an alcoholic parent. And I'm going to say normally dysfunctional. So there was nothing really special about it. I know she's Michelle. I want fun stories, but it's really just me and my little sister getting into her bedroom and stealing her makeup and her getting mad at us. Get out of my bedroom. And us running down the hallway with her blue eyeshadow, normal stuff like that. And my older brother was off surfing. He was just like, I'm out. He was smart. And then my little sister was out skating up and down the street with her friend Cindy. And then I was the middle daughter, very emotional, and took on a lot of the emotionality in the family. It's very common for the middle child to do that. I'm very common that way. So I was always like cleaning and rearranging furniture and saving animals. That was my thing because I felt animals understood me better and more than people. And to this day, I feel the same way, by the way. That has not changed at all. As a matter of fact, the way the world's going right now, I really get animals and they get me. And I just don't understand what the hell is going on in the world when it comes to people and the things they're doing and behaving. I just kind of go, excuse me? And they call animals dangerous. I'm going to have to say, I don't know. I don't think I agree with that. Animals are predictable and they do things that make sense for their survival. But now what's going on in the world, I'm not sure. But having said that, I'm still that middle child who loves animals. That's for sure.
How did your love of animals begin?
From the moment I set my claws on one. We grew up with a family dog and loved that dog. And I was always coming up the driveway with stray cats, anything I could get my paws on. It was weird. You meet these people who just say, I can't explain it, but I have a connection with animals. So it wasn't anything that like happened specifically. It just was a natural attraction and passion. The minute I saw them, they saw me, and then that was it. A lot of people do tell me I have a way with animals. My younger son, Maximus, oh my God, he is the animal whisperer like I've never seen. I would hope that he's taking after me. But people are like, oh, don't touch my dog. He hates people. He'll bite your hand. And then you look back and my son has the dog upside down and he's rubbing his belly. And then the owner's like, he's never done that with a stranger. I'm like, well, he's never met Maximus. I just think that Mother Earth is a beautiful planet. And that includes all living creatures and plants and human beings. And we're all connected. And that includes animals, especially animals. We use animals in therapy a lot for a very good reason, because they're therapeutic. You can find the most nasty person, and the minute they see like a video of something heartwarming with an animal, even that softens the most grouchy person. Usually they have to be pretty sour not to allow one of those really great animal videos to soften them.
You know, you're active on Instagram. Have you ever seen the Django Smile with the dog? That's a really good animal channel.
I have no idea who I'm following. I'm so not savvy with social media. I just like. And then if I notice I'm liking one particular site a lot more than others, I'll go to the site and look at their other stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, I love it. And I'll follow. And I know they're like, is Dedee Pfeiffer following me? I'm like, yep, because I love what you're posting.
My late mom was a fan of animals and loved dogs, had whippets for decades.
Yeah, I love all animals, all of them. I wouldn't even call them creatures. We're connected to them, their life.
With Christmas just around the corner, what was a Christmas like growing up for you?
When we were little, we used to play Yahtzee. Rick, Shell, and I and Lori, we would play Yahtzee at the kitchen table because we would open up our gifts on Christmas Eve. So we had a tradition that we would all have to take baths. Well, Rick and Shell would help Lori and I take baths. And I think what was going on is Santa Claus happened to come a little early, because otherwise, how would you explain Santa Claus coming Christmas Eve? And then we'd be all bathed and we would play Yahtzee, and then we'd be able to go and open our gifts. And we each had a few. We were very humble growing up, but I'm very lucky that we got that. I mean, considering a lot of kids didn't have anything. But stereotypical with kids, you're like, yeah, but Cindy down the street got a Barbie. Yeah, well, that's nice for Cindy. Go borrow it. So I think I like the Christmas tree the best, because when the Christmas tree went up, you knew love was going to happen and community. And I love the smell of the Christmas tree. It's really environmentally a no-no to keep buying supply and demand plastic. I'm really trying to reduce my carbon footprint the best I can. So my older son is like, why don't you just get a plastic tree? And my other son is like, do not open that can of worms. You know, she's going to preach you for 10 minutes as to why we're not going to buy a plastic Christmas tree. And I said, I'm telling you, you'd miss the smell of that Christmas tree. And also now, I don't know if you know this, but they have Christmas trees in pots. So you don't have to recycle it. You could actually keep it alive. So I'm thinking about doing that this year to help Mother Earth out a little bit.
Very important question here. Who is the best Yahtzee player in the Pfeiffer family?
I don't remember. I know that to this day, as adults, we all love to play games. We are big game players. That is for sure. We play charades like no one's business. Big at the holidays now with David's family. David's Michelle's husband. East Coast, West Coast family get together, and we don't play against each other. We just mix up the teams and we go at it. But I don't remember the best Yahtzee player, but I can tell you right now, as adults, when it comes to adult games, well, I don't know. I was going to say Shell, but I'm going to say my little sister Lori. She's very unassuming. She just kind of slithers in there and she just wins. And you're like, wait a minute, how'd that happen? I'm just out of the box. So I'm the wild card. They never really know what to do with me. They're like, oh God, if we get Dedee, it's a good thing, but not a good thing. Because I will do anything to get that point. I'll throw myself across the room and bruise myself. And they're like, okay, well, they got the word. I'm 5 years sober. But when I would drink, oh my God, I was completely a lunatic. And now I'm a little more safe. But I'm going to say we're all competitive in a healthy way. We don't compete against each other as much as we are self-competitive. We set standards for ourselves and we want to reach them. And the bar is pretty high. So we do have to kind of watch that so we don't constantly set ourselves up for disappointment. You have to set goals that are reachable. Otherwise, you're constantly disappointed.
You ever do a game night where you invite over a whole bunch of people and you pull out 20, 30 games and let them play what they want?
When I had my 50th birthday, this is 9 years ago, and I'm a New Year's baby. So on New Year's Eve, I invited a handful of friends who also had kids and told them to come over. But here are the requirements. One, everyone had to wear pajamas because it was New Year's Eve and I wanted everyone just to relax, not get all dressed up because it wasn't about that. Two, they had to bring a game that they really love playing. And then, of course, at that point I was drinking. So bring your own booze and your food and we're all going to share. So, of course, what happened was you had a bunch of adults, all from relatively the same generation, dancing and bobbing in the kitchen, playing games in every room, dancing to Madonna, Tears for Fears, Wham, Michael Jackson. And the kids were mortified. Our kids were like, you guys are out of control. We're like, yeah, I understand. And we were literally doing that 80s dance that people make fun of. We were doing it for real. And the kids thought we were crazy, but I wanted to show that don't be afraid of age. It's just a number. And we had the best time ever. That was the one time I had people bring a bunch of games, and in every room we had a different game going. So it was a blast. I haven't done that since because, like I said, I'm still kind of strengthening my sober legs. So that's something I used to do drinking, and now I'm trying to rediscover what that looks like sober. So one day I will do it for sure. I'm looking forward to doing it in a sober way. It's really important when you're in recovery that you know your boundaries and you don't push yourself sometimes too far. Because I'm very protective over my recovery because it's a rebirth. So of course I'm very protective over my rebirth.
I had a guest on a few months ago, Hillary Phelps, who is Michael Phelps' older sister, who has a similar story of issues with substance abuse and going through recovery. What was the moment for you that you kind of realized it was time to address it and perhaps get some help?
That's another way of asking me about my bottom, right? Everyone wants to know, what was your bottom?
Not necessarily what the bottom was, because the bottom, you don't necessarily know if you need help or not. But what was kind of the moment that you said, maybe it's time that I can't figure this out myself?
I think anybody who has an issue with the disease of addiction, and it's a disease, and it doesn't matter what your DOC is, your drug of choice. I mean, it does matter when it comes to meth. Oof, meth is the devil's drug. But otherwise, heroin, alcohol, sex addiction, gambling, when you have an addiction, which is a disease, you're using something to an extent where it's no longer a positive thing in your life. So, you know, deep down inside, you just can't come to terms with it because what happens is there's such shame that revolves around addiction. There's still a lot of social stigma. So when did I know? Oh, I knew way back, early on, because you act differently than your friends. People tell you that you change. You wake up the next day and sometimes you remember what you said and did, and sometimes you don't. All of these are strong indicators there's something going on and that you're not a normie. Now, I'm not talking about when you're young and you go to your first party and there's a keg and everyone gets drunk. But some of us end up from there going into a world of addiction, and others kind of go, whoa, that was a stage in my life and now I'm past it. I knew all along that there was something up with my drinking. And then as I got older, there were moments where I could absolutely not drink. When I was pregnant, I didn't drink. When I was working, I didn't drink. When I went to college, I didn't drink. That did not mean I didn't have a problem. So because society says, oh, well, she can go 9 months and be pregnant and not drink, she probably doesn't have a problem. Well, that's false information. It's old information and it's incorrect. So the more you start to know about what addiction really is, actually the more scary it is because there's no longer excuses that you can hide behind. Like, well, I didn't drink when I went to school, so see, I can control myself. That doesn't mean that you're not a high functioning alcoholic or a high functioning addict. Therein lies the difference. So you may not be experiencing homelessness in the streets that hard up and drinking yourself silly every day. That's just one color of what addiction can look like. High functioning alcoholics like myself and my father and others were hard to detect. Your addict is very cunning and very clever, do anything to hide it so you can continue on using until finally you just go, I can't. So I knew all along, I just was ashamed that I couldn't control it because the shame was just kneecapping. And every time I could go a week without drinking or whatever, I'd be like, yeah, see, I don't have a problem. I'm fine. I'm like everybody else. One of the things you want to be so badly when you're an addict is like everybody else, which is a normie, but we're not. And already there's isolation probably happening to begin with. You throw that element in and it certainly doesn't help. So addiction is very complicated, very leveled, very layered, and it's different for every person. That's just my personal belief in what I learned and my own learned experience.
I can somewhat relate in the fact I have a very rare liver condition. And so I'm not a normie as well. And I find when I want to be normal, it creates this stress and anxiety that other people don't necessarily see, but can actually make matters worse.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the hardest things is that it's not just the person like you or myself in the situation or others like us, but those around us. I often talk about this on my podcast, talking about those around us. Like my family had no idea what to do with me. They had not a clue. Most people don't. And they inadvertently say something or do something that's not helpful, but that's generally never their intention. So it's not just educating the person, but it's also those around us. But I think also for ourselves saying, hey, I'm different and being okay with that. That's tough. It's your internal work that we constantly do by saying, I'm not like you, and that's okay. Somehow you have to make that okay. Some people use religion, some people use spirituality, some people use science. There's lots of ways to find your authentic self, whatever that might look like for you. But I think that self-discovery, that enlightenment is incredibly important and helpful in trying to be okay with who you are and what you're not, for me anyways.
Was there a close friend or a family member that came to you and kind of nicely said, hey, maybe you need to have some help, that helped you take that step to going down the road of sobriety?
Yes, my family came to me and basically said, we'd like to do an intervention. And this is on a Tuesday. And they said, we'd like you to be there on Thursday for this intervention. And I took one look at this person in my family and I said, you don't have to do that. And I said, oh my God, you're not going to pull up with that car on that show intervention. And of course, they were like, no, oh my God. They went to a very reputable, amazing rehab called Breathe Life Healing Center in Los Angeles. Kathleen Murphy is the head coordinator, and she's amazing. She's an addiction and trauma specialist. Long story short, I said, you don't have to do that. I'll go. Will you take care of my children, my animals? And I will go. 3 days later, I was in an intensive inpatient. But what happened was I was ready. I said to this person in my family, I was already looking at 800 numbers on my TV at night that came up saying, and I don't think it was an accident, 1-800-Anonymous, call if you think you have a problem. And I wrote the number down. I just could not call. I couldn't call. The shame, like I said, that shame is serious. Anyone out there listening to this podcast, and if you experience shame, you know what I'm talking about. It kneecaps you and it keeps you from seeking help because somewhere along the way, society says it's weak to ask for help. I'm sorry. I'm going to say, no, it's not. I think it takes one strong ass mofo to ask for help. It takes some huevoses. I'm trying not to cuss on your podcast. It takes a strong person to say, hey, I need a little help. But yet somehow, at least the way I was raised, that was a sign of weakness. And yet now that's one of my things by recovering out loud. Let people know, hey, don't you call me weak. What I did was huge and took a lot of strength to say, I'm going to leave my kids and family for 30 days, no phone, no computer, nothing, and trust a group of people I've never met before to try to heal me. That's scary. And when you do that, that takes strength. Because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're going to come out with a third eye. You know, you just don't know what they do behind these closed doors in treatment centers. And I said to that person, oh my God, yeah, I'll go. I just didn't know how to ask. And it was funny because this person was like, oh, we didn't expect you to say, we expect you to say, F you, you're the one with the problem. Because when someone's not ready, that's the response you get. You get attacked. And that's not who they met when they asked me. They met somebody who was broken inside and did not know where to go. So this is why I say I have such compassion for my own family, because I look back and I think, wow, how hard that was for them to finally get the courage to say, we got to go to her. She's slowly dying. Because that's what was going on. When you're active in your disease, you're slowly dying. You're existing at best, but slowly dying for sure. And when you finally take that leap to say, okay, I'm ready to make this leap and change, it is a rebirth from the minute you decide to start the work. And that's why I feel like I'm like 5 years old at almost 60, because I'm living life all over again. But now with a clear head, love in my heart, good thoughts in my head, and my behavior follows that next indicated action of doing light work. And I know why I'm here on this earth. And it wasn't to sit there and slowly die and have my family, my children, my friends watch me and go, oh, how sad. She's such a great woman or girl or mom or sister. And look at her. She's just so awful to herself. That's hard to watch that. So I'm recovering out loud. There you go.
It's one thing to know that it's okay to ask for help, but it's another thing, I would say, to actually take that step to ask for help. What advice do you have for listeners to be able to go from point A of knowing that you need help to asking for help?
Well, I can tell you one thing. People don't like to hear this, but sadly, it is the truth. But if anyone out there is active in their disease or no longer active in their disease in recovery, like myself, or is around somebody who is still active in their disease, you know, and I know this truth. It doesn't matter if you present somebody with the best treatment available to mankind. If the person's not ready, they're not ready, period. That's a sad truth. And I think it's one of the hardest things to accept is you can present help to somebody. If they're not ready, they're not ready. And they know it as well. Every day I wanted to be ready. Every day, especially on those days you woke up and you didn't remember what the hell you said or did the night before. Oh my God. Or they would tell you how awful you were. I wanted to be ready so bad, but for whatever reason, I wasn't. So everybody's journey is different. That's number one. And as hard as that is to accept, the best you can do is to say to somebody who you see suffering, hey, listen, I just want to let you know I love you and I can see you're going through a hard time. And when you're ready to maybe seek some help, let me know and I'll help you find that help. If they tell you to F off, you're the one who's messed up, you're the one who needs help, you say, okay, I hear you. I just want to let you know that and walk away. You plant the seed and run is what I call it. Because the worst thing you do is accuse them. You're an alcoholic. You're a meth head. This is not helpful. Because remember, nobody chooses to have a disease of addiction. Nobody I know wakes up one morning and goes, hey, I want to be an addict. Because that sounds like a lot of fun. Nobody. So it's very hard, though, to have any sympathy for somebody who's active in their disease because often the behavior is pretty abominable or awful. And there's nothing worse than feeling helpless around someone you love. And there's nothing worse when you're trying to get them help and they're just flipping you the bird or they keep relapsing. And by the way, remember this, people misunderstand relapses. Relapses are somebody I would view as somebody in a boxing ring who keeps getting knocked down. And every time they get up, what do we call that? A fighter, right? He gets knocked down, gets back up, knocked down, gets back up. We cheer that person on. When somebody in recovery relapses over and over again, we call them a loser. And that to me is the wrong frame of mind to approach it. If anything, I would say to that person, wow, I can see you really want this, but you're struggling. But you really want this. It's not the relapse. It's the coming back to try to get sober again or in recovery again from your DOC, your drug of choice. So maybe that person needs a different treatment plan. Maybe that person needs to try a different modality. If they're using the 12 steps, maybe they need the SMART program. There are a variety of ways to stop using your drug of choice, whether it's alcohol, gambling, or a substance. There are so many ways out there now. My agent got sober using a laser acupressure machine. Go figure. There's so many ways. So giving up, that's an option. But if you keep going back to the same kind of treatment plan that you've relapsed a few times, I say it's kind of like going back to the same dentist and they keep poking you in the gums. And each time you keep bleeding and they blame it on you as being a bleeder. It's like, hold on, you're poking me in the gum. I'd go to a different dentist that knows how to clean your teeth without poking your gums every time. Find a different treatment plan. This is your life. And the help is out there. I personally know a man who's opening 2 new rehabs in Los Angeles that are fantastic. And they're using brand new modalities. They sound amazing. And I'm going to start doing some shout outs on my podcast called Down with Dedee to let people know that there's different ways out there to approach your disease. So let's start looking at people who are relapsing as fighters in a ring who are not giving up, not losers that keep falling down.
When you said the fighter getting knocked down and getting up and getting knocked down and getting up, I was thinking of the 90s song called Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba with the lyric, I get knocked down, but I get up again, nothing ever gonna keep me down. And it's a song about the band being a mess, but still able to get back on their feet again.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny. Check out the words that we use, which are very old, I might add. Oh, is he or she or they clean or dirty? Oh, I heard they're clean. What do you mean clean? You know what I say when someone goes, oh, is so-and-so clean? I go, you mean took a shower? I don't know. Go smell them. Are you asking me if they're active in their disease or not? That I don't know. But it's funny, we use these words that are pretty derogatory, clean or dirty. Well, we can start. Now, I'm not going to tell people how to think or what words to say because I don't like to be micromanaged like that. But maybe it's about being mindful when you go call a family member or a friend clean or dirty. Maybe you need to start using language that's more correct. And also they'll find less offensive. in or out of their disease, active in their disease or not active in their disease. Because then all of a sudden there's compassion behind those words. And there's maybe not an understanding because you don't have that same disease, but you're acknowledging they're on a path, a journey. Generally, this is why a lot of people in recovery gravitate towards each other. Just like someone who's been raped, they find groups of other people who have had a similar experience because they find comfort in knowing that they understand. You can use shorthand and they get it. You don't know their story, you know they get you on some level. There's comfort and support. And this is why communities are so important. In America, we have this I, me thing. And sadly, in some situations, I think it's actually very helpful. In most, I think that we need to lean on each other. When there's natural disasters, is it really an I? No. Natural disaster, it's a we. You know, when there's a big fat earthquake or hurricane or whatever, we're all gathering together to help each other. Damn straight. It's the same thing. That's what people go, oh, well, she's only with her little group. It's like, well, maybe her group understands her. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you. I love my family. They're all normies. And they're the first ones to say to me, I love you. I have no idea what it means to be you, but let me know how I can help you. I love that they knew not to say, oh, I understand what you're going through, because that would actually be very hurtful because they don't know what I'm going through and makes you feel even more alone within your own family. And yet they're very loving. So they said, we don't know what it feels like to be you, but let us know what it looks like to help you. And a lot of that means them understanding when I go to family functions and they're all having a glass of wine like a normal person, that sometimes I call getting the itchies. I go, yeah, I think I'm going to go now. They're like, okay, we love you. That's it. And they just get it. And I'll say it's rarely the alcohol that makes me itchy. It's other stuff. People think that we get triggered. They call it triggering. I call it itchy. You would think it's the alcohol or the cigarettes, because I stopped smoking as well, that gets you itchy. I often find it's what people say are more triggering. I'm like, no, it's not what you're drinking. It's what you're saying. It's more triggering than anything. So I'm out. And there's something beautiful and freeing about being able to lay down loving boundaries. Because when I was drinking, I had no boundaries. And that's also very scary looking back. And how am I supposed to teach my children what loving boundaries look like if I don't show them by doing it myself?
One more question on this, and it's a fairly serious one. Did you ever have the moment where you said, maybe I'm sick of this, I don't want to do this, maybe today's the last day?
Never. Shockingly, even when I was in the worst states of my disease, I still had this incredible desire and passion to live. And I think that's why I take my sobriety so passionately, like I do my children and Mother Earth's creatures, because it was never about wanting to leave my earth body, is what I call it, because I don't believe in death. I wanted to stop the pain of my trauma. Yes. I was always trying to just moot or stop or run away from the pain so I could live happily. And the problem is that when you're using substances or anything to an extreme to run from pain or PTSD or whatever it is, we know that's going to bite you in the ass. It's going to catch up with you. So it was never a wanting to leave my earth body. It was about wanting to stop the pain of the trauma. So part of my recovery was not just dealing with my disease, but it was also peeling the onion of one's trauma, which generally speaking, you think it's one or two situations in your life that you can remember. When you start doing the real work, it actually goes back to your childhood. And that's painful. And you think you're just gonna, well, for the sake of a better word, die if you go to that pain. If you finally lean into it and sit in that pain, you actually think you're gonna die. You're running from it, right? But you know, the crazy part is you never die from leaning into the pain, but you can easily die by using your drug of choice, by running from it. And by the way, I always say trauma and addiction, ooh, they love each other. They often go hand in hand. They love to tango. So when you're dealing with somebody who has underlying trauma or PTSD and addiction, both need to be addressed generally separately from two different specialists, unless you know someone who knows both. Because otherwise you're only going to treat the trauma and not the addiction and vice versa. And that's a relapse waiting to happen.
You sound like you're in a pretty good place. I would imagine helping other people along the way, whether listeners of my podcast, your podcast, or other things that you've been on, feel better, get better, and maybe take that next step to improve their lives.
For I'd say 98% of people in recovery, one of the major goals that we do to selfishly keep our own butts sober is to give back and to help others, especially the newcomers. And I call it a ricochet effect. When I know that I've moved somebody or affected somebody in a positive way, it bounces back to me and it fills my heart with joy and love and gratefulness. And I go, I could never have done that had I been using. It's that person who helped me along the way. You get to give that back. I don't even think that's just about recovery. I think we're supposed to be kind of hopefully doing light work, all of us. You don't want to walk around with dark, evil negativity in your heart and your brain and your thoughts and your actions. But how about just saying hi to somebody when you're walking by, or, you know what I mean? Light work is wherever you go, you carry light in your heart and you spread that a little bit. Look at the name tag of the clerk when you check out and just say, hey, well, how are you, John? And they'll look at you like, how'd you know my name? And they're like, oh, my name tag, because no one has ever looked at John's name tag checking out at Ralph's. Just ask him how he's doing. That's light work right there. And when you walk to your car, you kind of go, I just hopefully spread a little bit of light in John's life. And I may or may not ever see him again. I don't know. But I bet you John might spread that.
I'm all about paying it forward.
Paying it forward. I believe in my heart. The majority of people in the world want the same thing. Our leaders no longer represent what we want, meaning the majority of the masses in the world want peace on earth. We want equality. We want diversity. We want love. We don't want to hurt Mother Earth. We don't want to hurt animals. We don't want to hurt each other. Problem is that the leaders around the world no longer represent us because that's what we want. But we are, I believe, classically conditioned to believe that we don't have power over that. The sad truth is we do have power over that. It's actually just knowing in our hearts as the masses, we want that. And if we start doing our own work individually and in communities, we can overpower the dark negativity that's in the world right now. Push back on dark with light.
I know you have to go in a couple of minutes. I do want to talk a little bit more about your acting career. And forgive me for geeking out here, but I am a huge Seinfeld fan. How did you get the role of Victoria?
Okay, first of all, you can geek out all you want. Are you kidding me? To this day, I'm still in shock that I was ever on Seinfeld. I'm not joking. I think I went into a conscious coma when I got the role. This is what happened back in the day. If you were lucky, you got to read for Seinfeld, but there was only like 1 to 2 guest starring roles per episode. So I had already read, I think twice before for one of Jerry's girlfriends, because remember, he always had like 1,000. I would read and not get it, and then read, not get it. And by the time I went in for Victoria, I said to my agent, why are they calling me in again? I read and I never get it. And at the time she was like, because clearly they like you. They just have to figure out where to put you. So get your butt in there and give it all you got. So I thought, okay, here we go again. And I went in and I was shocked. No one was more shocked than me when I got it. When I got on the set, I was still in shock because when you're there in real life with all these amazing, iconic actors, whom, by the way, work like a beautifully oiled locomotive train. And as a guest star, you just have to jump on because they work so well together. You know, and you got to jump on. It was mind-blowing. Like I said, I'm a bit of a nervous Nelly and I have anxiety. So I know I just went into complete denial. I don't have a lot of memories of working down there because I was in that amount of shock. You know how they say when you're in shock, you kind of don't have any memory? Well, that would be me on Seinfeld. So when I look at the trailers or I see little clips, I kind of go, oh, yeah, that's right. And I kind of go, I was on Seinfeld. Oh, my God, somebody pinch me. They are an amazing group of people who just welcome all of their guest stars with open arms. They give you everything they got so that you have the capability to come in and show them your chops. And that's why that show was just so successful. No egos, none of that icky Hollywood stuff. It was just professionalism, and they had a really good time doing it. They're some of the funniest people. And my son's cat to this day is Kramer. He's a huge Maine Coon. He runs into the room at 100 miles an hour and tries to stop and can't, and slides into the oven or slides into the cabinets or the refrigerator at 100 miles an hour while turning forward. It is hysterical. And I always go, it's Kramer. And my boys are like, what is that? Remember, they're the new generation. So I still have yet to show them footage of Kramer, because once they see Kramer, they're going to know, oh, yeah, that's totally Morpheus, the cat. So every time I see my cat, I go, oh, yeah, Seinfeld, I was on that.
Kramer, to me, was like the comedic son of Ed Norton from The Honeymooners.
Yeah, exactly. So I have to say, it's kind of really fun to have this cat that just comes in and reminds me of an amazing show that I had, such a great opportunity, and certainly looks good on the old resume, right? And also, I didn't realize until years later that the episode that I was on was an important one because it was the one episode where Jason's character got everything go right for him, which normally everything goes wrong. It's funny because I'm notorious for kind of doing something and then moving on. It's like my podcast. I never look back. Once I do them, I do them. My producer does little teeny edits when there's overlap, and not always because I'm terrible at overlapping. You, my friend, have been brilliant. I'm noticing, wow, no overlap. I'm the worst.
Your credit list is incredible. Whether we're talking Friends or having a key role for numerous episodes on Sybil, Wings, Murder, She Wrote, It's unbelievable the net that you have cast because there are so many people like me. That was my era of watching a lot of television. And now you've kind of had a resurgence where you were back on Big Sky, and it's kind of neat to see you back.
Thank you. I call being recycled. Very important to recycle and recycle us actors who've been doing it for 40 years, right? I'm back. And it feels good because I'm back sober. I'm back recovering out loud. And hopefully people will look and say, oh, that's what a rebirth looks like. And you can have a rebirth just by changing the trajectory of your life. If you're in a miserable job, okay, maybe there's a change there. Or maybe a hobby on the side to pair with the nasty job. I'm such a huge advocate for really living your life. While your soul is in this body in this lifetime, what you going to do with it is my question, right? It's not that you're here. What you going to do with it while you're here?
We talked about this a little bit earlier. You host a podcast called Down with Dedee. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Down with Dedee is out there and active, and I have a lot of great guests. The format, real quick, about my podcast is about recovery. It stems from my recovery, but not every guest talks about recovery. It's 15 minutes on whatever social issue that's important to them. And that can be recovery or it can be mental health. A lot of my friends are Nat Geo correspondents or photographers. So they talk about animal welfare. Or like my sister, Michelle, came on. She talked about her perfume line, Henry Rose, 1000% transparent. And anyway, so the first 15 minutes is about that. The next 10 minutes, I ask all my guests, do they believe in the paranormal and supernatural? Yes, no, and why? And then I end my podcast last 5 minutes asking them what animal they'd be reincarnated as. That's Down with Dedee. Every episode is just like that. So it's a colorful 30 minutes. And you get to really know my guests on a different level because these questions are not ones you hear all the time, but their answers always surprise me.
Right quick before I let you go, what's a favorite story that you have with your sister Michelle that doesn't involve the Hollywood scene?
When I was in junior high, so you're preteen, so everything is important. The world revolves around you. And I had slept with curlers and it didn't dry. So that day when I went to do my hair, and at that age, you have acne. I woke up with acne. Of course, the day of your graduation, you always wake up with something like that, right? So I had that happen. I was devastated. And you do want to like crawl under a rock and never be seen again until your acne clears up. At least that's how it was. And my hair, half of it was frizzy and the other half was wet. And I thought, I'm not going to my graduation. This is horrible. And of course, my mom's like, oh, yes, you're going. And I was devastated. I couldn't even keep my makeup on my face. And by the way, this is when you had Maybelline all on the top and all on the bottom. And you had like 8 layers of Maybelline. It was a lot of mascara. So I kept crying off. My sister came in and she's like, let me help you. And she just sat me down and she calmed me down. And she fixed my face and she fixed my hair. And I'll never forget that. I just thought I was the most ugly thing that day. And looking back at the pictures, I looked really cute. And my sister saw her little sister, me, devastated. And I'll just never forget, was so sweet and so kind on a really important day. And she sat me down and like a good sister would do and help me. And I'm not sure if I ever told her thank you. And thank you for allowing me this memory because I'm going to text her when I'm done here and just say, I want to thank you for that because knowing me as a preteen, you didn't thank anybody for anything. Unless they gave you free Maybelline, right? So I'm going to say her saving the day for me. She fixed me up real pretty.
Dedee, I want to thank you so much for coming on the I Play 2 podcast with me today. It was great to hear about your stories of Seinfeld, growing up with your family, going through substance abuse and your successful sobriety. Look forward to having you on again soon in a couple of weeks. And thank you so much.
This was a beautiful, beautiful podcast. Thank you for having me on.